I've been using the Canon R5C as my main shooter for almost 2 years now, and in this video I'm going to be sharing the things that I love about this camera and some of the things that I hate about this camera. I'll also be sharing how I rig up the camera with all the parts and pieces that I use to make this functional for everyday use. So in this video I'm also going to be sharing media from a recent shoot that I was on, and I felt like this would be a really great example to share with you guys because I use this camera as a hybrid shooter for both photo and video. And for the shoot, I was doing photography and behind the scenes video content, so I was having to switch between the two, but that is where this camera excels, and that's mainly what I want to be talking about and featuring in this video specifically. Okay, so with photography being my main gig and then getting hired out as well for video work for clients, when I was initially looking into this camera, I was looking for a camera body that was going to be able to do both photo and video really well. And I'm the type of person that when I go to buy gear, I'm looking to buy an investment that's going to last me at least 4 to 5 years down the road. I really just hate the thought of having to buy gear and then flip gear in a couple years and then lose money on it, and just seems like such a headache to me. So I'm always thinking, how can I future-proof myself with the gear that I'm buying today? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an expensive camera as well as the lens, but to me, it's an investment for the future. So around 2 years ago, I was looking to upgrade from my Canon 1DX Mark II because I feel like the video and the photo just wasn't cutting it for the level that I wanted to produce at. And so I was initially looking at the Canon R5, but then thankfully the R5C came out not long after I started looking, and I really like this over the R5 because of its video features. Gene Nagata, aka Potato Jet, made a video on this camera when it was initially released, and in that video he was talking to a Canon rep, and I really like how that Canon rep separated the R5 from the R5C. He basically said that the R5 is a photo camera that also has video features, and then with the R5C, it's a cinema camera that also shoots photo. So when you switch into the photo mode, you're gonna see all the same settings as the R5, and then when you go into video mode, you'll see settings like you'd see in the C70 or the C300 Mark III. And speaking of switching between the photo and video mode, if you watch older videos, you're gonna see that a big complaint about the switch between the two was that it took a really long time to switch between them. And then a recent firmware update allowed that switch only to be 3 seconds, which is a lot better. It makes my workflow a lot easier. I know that it might sound a little bit behind the ball when switching from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera, but I know that there's still a lot of people that own DSLR cameras. So for those of you that are switching from DSLR to a mirrorless camera, I want to talk about my photography experience with this camera and as well the settings I'm using for mainly shooting action sports. And then after, I'm gonna go into the video settings and kind of how I'm using this for a video setup. So the one thing that I really loved when switching to a mirrorless from a DSLR was the live feed view in the viewfinder. That makes things way easier. You can adjust your settings, see whether it's too bright, too dark, without just having to look at the histogram in the back of your screen. It just makes things way easier. I'm in really fast environments with shooting action sports, so having this really makes things go very quick. But the one thing that I did find a little bit tricky to get onto was figuring out the best autofocus settings, because there wasn't a lot of people online talking about the whole sports aspect when shooting motion with, say, like the R5. There was a lot of portrait, a lot of weddings and things like that. There wasn't like super high intense sports settings, and so I kind of had to figure out what was going to work best for me. So I'm just going to quickly share the settings that I use in this camera when I'm shooting sports. Okay, so when we go into our menu, we're going to see autofocus, and then under tab 1, I'm going to read you from top to bottom what kind of settings I'm using that I think would be useful to you. So starting off with the AF operations, I use servo autofocus. And then for the autofocus method, I'm using autofocus face and track. And then for the subject detect, if I'm shooting a vehicle, I'm obviously gonna do vehicle, or if I'm shooting people, I'm gonna do person. So very self-explanatory there. And then the eye detection, I have enabled. And then for the continuous autofocus, I have that disabled. Now, when it comes to the touch and drag autofocus settings, I have the touch and drag autofocus off, and then the positioning method as relative, and then the active touch area on the right. Honestly, I don't use touch when I'm doing focusing. I'm always just using like the joystick at the back or just like custom function buttons when it comes to dialing in my focus. So that's just kind of irrelevant to me. Now, what I really found important, which I didn't necessarily do on the Canon 1DX Mark II, but I did do and set up on this camera, was custom function buttons. And so starting at the top here, I have shutter button at half press, and that is set to metering and autofocus start. And then going to the button 10, which is on the top of my camera here, I have that set up to shooting in my burst mode. So say if I'm in a environment where I'm just shooting singles and I'm like, okay, I want to switch over to burst really fast, I just click that button and it switches me over right away. So the autofocus on is set to eye detection AF. And so whenever I click this button, the AF on, then it's going to search for an eye specifically. And then for the auto iris, I have that set to metering and AF start. So if I click that, what it's going to do is it's going to set a center point for me, and then I can basically pick out my subjects. So say if I have multiple subjects and I just want to snipe out like one specific subject, then all I need to do is basically click that and then point at that subject, and it's going to lock onto that subject. And I have this all set up so that whenever I have my thumb off of those triggers, then I don't have to worry about it continuously searching. And then the last custom function that I've set up is this last ring on my camera. That is set up to control my ISO. So if you go into the custom function buttons under lens, you're gonna see it says ISO and then an arrow down. So now with this end ring on your lens, you can basically control increased ISO or lower your ISO. It's just really fast for when you're on set, just to dial in those settings and do it really quick. Now, when it comes to image quality, I love shooting in RAW because it gives you the most flexibility in post-production, but the pro and con of this camera is that the data rates are so high when you're shooting just straight RAW. So generally what I found myself doing is shooting in compressed RAW with this, and I haven't found any issues with that. Obviously, if I'm shooting for a client where it's really needed to shoot at full RAW, then I'm going to switch that over to full RAW and then, you know, just eat up a little bit more card space because it's worth it. But when it comes down to just shooting like personal or projects that don't matter as much, I feel like compressed RAW gets the job done, and as well, it still produces a really crisp, high quality image. Those are just a few of the things that I thought would be helpful as you're setting up your R5C for your photography. But if you are looking for a more in-depth review on the photography side, then just go check out videos on the R5, and that's basically going to give you the exact same knowledge. All right, now let's talk about the video side of this camera. The video quality on this camera is actually insane. I love that Canon actually gave us a truly hybrid camera where it has really great photo and as well really great video features now, just like what you'd see in the C70. We actually finally have an option to shoot all the way up to 8K with none of that overheating crap. Now my review on the video side of this is going to be a lot different from what you might see on YouTube, just because I'm using this as mainly a run and gun setup because I own the DJI Ronin 4D, so I'm using that for my stable kind of like steady shots. And then with this is just all straight handheld. So mainly because I am using this as a handheld rig, I get a lot of people ask me, what's it like without IBIS? And I've never felt that there's been an issue. Honestly, for the things that I'm shooting, I'm usually shooting sports. I like that handheld feel. It just kind of creates a raw feeling into the footage. And some of the things that I find could be a little problematic is that it's very light. And so, you know, generally when you're shooting handheld with a light camera, sometimes the footage can almost look too shaky. So generally when I'm shooting, I'm usually holding it tight to my chest. You know, I'll flip out the LCD tight to my chest like this, or I have an on-screen monitor. Things like that just makes this setup really easy. But even adding an on-screen monitor would add a little bit more weight to this. But as where it stands right now, as just straight run and gun, this is kind of how I'd run with it. Just have a cable run down to the side, and I'm just tucking it right up here, and I'm just rocking it like this. So yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit too shaky, but without IBIS, you know, I would rather trade off no IBIS for what I'm seeing in the IBIS in the R5. I believe that honestly for video is kind of unusable. That's kind of one of the things that I noticed about the R5 when I was watching video creators like Peter McKinnon. On the outsides of his frame, it was always like kind of warping and kind of jello-y. I hated that. Honestly, just coming from the 1DX Mark II, I didn't have option for IBIS anyways, so I was kind of used to that, and I thought, well, why in the world would I need it anyways? So I honestly don't mind having no IBIS. And then, you know, if you want to run this on a gimbal, it's super light, super easy to throw on a gimbal. The one thing that I do despise about this camera though is the battery life. The battery life on this thing is actually horrendous. No word of a lie, no joke. I will get a fresh Canon battery, plug that thing into this camera, and it says 30 minutes of record time. 30 minutes. That is terrible. So that's why when I'm always using this camera, I'm always gonna have this V-mount mounted up top. I'll get into this a little bit later, but yeah, the battery life is definitely a downside to this camera. But honestly, for its video quality plus its photography features, I just kind of learned to adapt to it and just figure it out. And you know, that's why I have this V-mount. And it's just like perfect because, you know, I usually only like slip in one Canon battery a day and then just run with this thing, even if I'm doing photos, and like I never have to change out a Canon battery. So I guess you could say that's a win. So I'm gonna walk you through how I have this camera rigged out. So let's start at the base and we'll talk about the small rig cage. I really like this cage because it gives you a lot of different mounting points. It gives you like a mounting point on top, gives you like another cold shoe here on the side. It gives you like mounting here, mounting on the bottom. It gives you like this tool. I use this all the time. I've been using this thing for 2 years and I can't believe that this tool has not come off. It just like magnetizes down in there, super easy. And as well, it doesn't protrude out in a way that's uncomfortable. I feel like holding onto it, I don't even really realize that the cage is there. So that's really easy to use. And then you'll see that this strap on the side here, this is a clutch strap by Peak Design. I use this all the time. I've been using this ever since I got the camera, just because I really hate the neck straps. And this is just super easy just to slide your hand into. If you lose your grip, you know, you're not gonna lose the camera. But then when it comes to the top here, this is a FX Lion V-mount battery. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. It's pretty light considering that's a V-mount battery. It's great because it goes type C to type C. That's how you can charge this camera. I found that you're not able to go from a USB type A from like a V-mount to a USB type C to power the camera. So I had to get a C to C, which this V-mount actually offers. So this actually just clips into this V-mount clip here, which is just threaded onto the small rig cage on top here. And then I just slide this on, click it in, and I can pull focus totally fine. I don't feel like this gets in the way. I really did not want the V-mount mounted on the back like this or mounted on the bottom. I just felt like that was going to be really annoying. And I found a guy on YouTube who actually mounts it on the top just like this and runs this setup. And I feel like this is way nicer, way easier. All I have to do is run a type C to the type C port here on the camera, charges the camera, and it's just a really easy, lightweight setup considering. I mean, I'm used to coming from a 1DX, and this whole setup right here is a lot lighter than the 1DX with a lens. So I'm pretty happy with this overall. So who is this camera gonna serve best? I believe that this camera serves best the true hybrid shooter that wants to do the best in video and the best in their photography. I'm using it from the perspective of professional photography and then also supplementing with video, but it could completely go the opposite way because there are so many great video features here. I haven't even dove into all the video features here. There's so much that I still could learn and I've yet to learn about the video, but nonetheless, it gets the job done for me. And as well, the photography is just amazing. There's a couple downsides for sure, but overall, for like a setup like this to be able to shoot 8K, with just like, you know, your type C cable, I mean, you really can't beat it. The quality of footage that you get out of this camera is actually mind-blowing. It is so sharp, so crisp, and the colors are just gorgeous straight out of camera. I love grading this footage because I feel like I can stretch it so far and I don't feel like I have to compromise when using this camera. So if you are a hybrid shooter and you're looking to level up or get into a mirrorless camera, I feel like this really is gonna serve you the best. I know that I didn't go super in depth on this camera. I know that there's so many other videos that you could have watched, but I really just want to take this from a really practical standpoint. But if there is something that I missed that you would really like me to touch on for practical use, leave it in the comments below and I will get back to you and answer those comments. If you are looking to get into sports photography, I think that you'll really like the videos that I'm sharing on this channel, so consider subscribing and check out this video. All right, I'll catch you over there. Peace.